So I just finished a reread of Blue Remembered Earth by Alastair Reynolds, the first in the Poseidon's Wake trilogy, or Poseidon's Children trilogy. The Poseidon's Wake, I think, is the name of the third novel. So this one has a very strange name, Blue Remembered Earth. Makes you think like subject, verb, object. Something called blue is remembering something called Earth. But that's not what it is, I think. I think it's meant to be adjective, adjective, noun, as in the Earth, which is blue, is being remembered. It is a Earth that is remembered. An Earth in the past. Remember Blue Earth? Blue Earth remembered. It's a weird one. So I read these when they first came out, this trilogy. This one came out in 2012, and 2013 and 14 are the other two. And I remember liking it quite a bit. It's a very sort of unique take on sci-fi in some ways. But reading this again, I felt it was very slow paced. It was a slow burn, as they call it. I don't know if that's just because I'm coming off the high of the Quantum Thief trilogy, reading that again, which I absolutely love. But there were moments, quite a few moments, where the main character, like for example, they're going to a restaurant and it describes them walking to the restaurant, and it describes them at the restaurant eating their meal and they're chatting, and then it describes them leaving the restaurant and the things they see as they talk and they look at the graffiti. And I understand it's all world building, and you know, it's near the start of the book and we're getting to know the characters, but it did drag on in places. And also it didn't, not that it wasn't coherent, but it did kind of jump around a bit at times. Like at the end when it's trying to explain about what was really happening on Mercury and the plans, but then it was also jumping and suddenly talking about this thing that was found on Phobos, and it didn't feel as tight of a book as it could have been. But I am going to continue rereading these series because I know what's coming. Vaguely. I mean, it's over 10 years since I read these, but I know this series is a different sort of series in that each book follows sort of a second or another generation of these characters, and so we can see humanity advancing through the books, and I'm looking forward to that. So but yeah, this one felt like when you remember hearing about the Sanderlanche, is that how it's pronounced? The Brandon Sanderson thing, where at the end of his books so much stuff happens and it's amazing. This one kind of was the same as that, but I feel like that's more of a hundreds of pages of not much happening, that when something actually does happen at the end of the book, you're like, whoa, it's so cool, all these things are happening. It's because you're used to not much actually happening. Anyways, so the unique thing about the setting in this book is that Africa is the sort of technological power and sort of hegemonic power. Hegemon. Africa. So like if you think back to history, like China was the major power for thousands of years. Egypt was a major power, and then like Europe had its time in the limelight, and now in sort of the current day, the 20th century was sort of the U.S. hegemony, just kind of coming to an end. But in this world, in the 21st century, Earth of the 22nd century, it takes place in 2160s. Africa is the big thing. So all the characters are African or of African descent, and takes place partially whenever we're on Earth, we're in Africa for the most part. So that's cool. I mean, culturally, there's not much African culture there. I mean, it's written by a Welsh guy. Also, what could you say African culture looks like in the 22nd century? I mean, also Africa is a huge continent, so there's no sort of singular unitary African culture. Although in this future, nationalities don't really exist. So a lot of this takes place on the border of Kenya and Tanzania, which Kenya and Tanzania no longer exist. They're part of the United East Africa or something like that, which sounds like a Hearts of Iron formable nation. So it's also utopian. It's positive in its outlook. It's not a dystopian future where we're overrun by an alien invasion or we're overrun by rampant AI or whatever. It's generally a sort of a positive, good future, looking forward to sort of humanity's progress, and they're at a good place, but they can be better. So there's no famine, there's no wars, there's still political tensions and political entities, but for the most part, everything's Gucci. So at this point, everyone has these nanites in their head that they call their enhancements. The Earth is sort of a panopticon, an all-seeing eye, where everything is constantly being seen by the something called the mechanism, which sort of has eliminated crime. There's no such thing as crime because as soon as you think about committing a crime, the mechanism steps in and literally stops it by freezing your body because it has control of the nanites in your brain. There's also this thing called the AUG, which is short for like augmented reality, just kind of like the internet that you can access at any time. But because everything's in your head, you don't need tablets or phones or anything. People can also ching places, which is think of a phone call, except the person will actually appear in front of you in the room because the nanites in your head are putting the sensory data that it's receiving from the nanites in the other person's head, and people can sort of bounce back and forth and experience being in other places. They can also use golems or these robots to sort of slave them and control them while their physical body's in another place. So it is sort of a dictatorship, but it's a benevolent dictatorship in that all sort of revolves around this machine called the mechanism that controls everything. There's still political entities. So there's, for example, the United Aquatic Nations and the United Surface Nations, which are made up of, like I said, United East Africa and the West African states and whatever they are. There's also humanity's colonized the sort of the system. So we have places on the moon which are colonized. There's a special place on the moon called the descrutinized zone, where the mechanism does not have power and there's not this panopticon. People sort of have a measure of privacy there. There are cities on Mars. There are the gas giants also have settlements. Humanity's kind of settled the whole system at this point. Speaking of the political organizations, the United Aquatic Nations, the UAN, follow this thing called the Panspermian Initiative, or the Green Efflorescence, where they believe that not just humanity should spread beyond the stars, but all life should equally have a chance to go beyond the stars. So plants, animals, everything should be able to colonize space. They also, a lot of them are sort of merfolk. They undergo surgeries and genetic alterations to sort of become aquatic again, and they live sort of under the sea. One of them turns into this giant whale woman who is constantly growing, and because she's constantly growing, she doesn't age. So she's like over 200 years or 150 years old and still going for it. Because of advancements in technology, the sort of the characters in this book that are in their 30s will expect to see 150 no problem. There are characters that are over 100, but because they were born before these medical advancements, they are looking quite old, but still they're over 100. We have this main company, Akinya Space, which was founded by Eunice Akinya, that has sort of not a monopoly, but they're a very rich and powerful company, a family-run company by the Akinyas. They have sort of sent robots out to the asteroid belt and the Kuiper belt and throughout the system, and are mining and manufacturing and refining various stuff from the asteroids and shipping it back to Earth, and that's how they make their money. Eunice is not a main character, but she's sort of the main focal point. She's the matriarch of the Akinya clan. There's a lot of elephant stuff in this book, I guess, because it's like African based, but they talk a lot about matriarchs in Africa, in elephant society, and sort of the Akinyas have their matriarch in Eunice Akinya. At the start of the book, she is over 130 years old, 131 or something like that. And she's very interesting. She was the founder of this company, but she was also a pioneer, a space explorer. She's been to just about every system or every planet and moon or whatever. She's also is known for taking this trip to the very edge of the solar system and gone out. I don't know if she went to the Oort cloud or she went super far out, and then turned back. And when she got back, she stopped exploring and sort of stayed in this. She's built a habitat around her ship and lived there in lunar orbit for 60 years or something like that. So she's just been existing up there by herself. She was born in the 2030s, so like I said, she's like 131. Takes place in 2161. That kind of seems strange to me. I do not believe that 150 years, humanity will have colonized the solar system. That seems way too soon. I mean, it's been over 50 years since we stepped foot on the moon, and there's nothing up there now. So Eunice was friends with this girl, Lin Wei, I think, a Chinese name, I don't know how to pronounce it, who was the founder of the Panspermian Initiative. And Lin Wei actually is still alive. She sort of says that she drowned, like Lin Wei drowned, but she actually just became one of the aquatics. She had surgery to change her body into like a whale person. So she's the one that's constantly growing and is like massive, and that's how she's still alive. But she calls herself Methuselah, I guess, Arethusa. So she still exists. But her and Eunice, Akinya, and the Panspermians, they worked together on this project on Mercury, which, like, way back before the events of this book. I'm gonna like explain all of the sort of reveals at the end of the book chronologically, so we'll understand what happens by the time we get to the events of this book. But on Mercury, they worked together, the Panspermians and Akinya space, for whatever reason. There was lots of free energy on Mercury because it's so close to the sun. So the Akinyas helped the Panspermians set up this telescope called Ocular, which is like this massive spread out telescope of many different sort of eyes on the edge of the system, run by an artellect. So artellects are artificial intellects, like AI. An artellect called Ariadne, I think. Or is it Arachne? Something Greek and spider based. Anyways, artellects are sort of forbidden and banned in this world. AI, they're strictly controlled and very illegal. But anyways, Akinya Space and Eunice helped set up this telescope for the Panspermians, and the Panspermians let them use their base on Mercury with all its energy for physics research. Now, they were actually doing physics research, but it was like a double bluff where they were also doing artellect research, which is highly illegal, but the artellect research was a cover-up for their real physics research, which was this crazy alien physics stuff. So it turns out that on Phobos, Eunice Akinya came across this, like Phobos is one of the moons of Mars, came across these fragments of stone that, when put together, are sort of not a Rosetta Stone, but they have a whole bunch of scribblings on them that explain alien physics that humanity has not yet understood. And so Eunice secretly develops these physics into technologies for space travel, while also doing artellect research, which is highly illegal. Now, she gets caught doing this, and they have a big falling out, the Panspermians and the Akinya space. So they sort of secretly shift their research, Akinya space and Eunice shift their research to this ice-teroid way out in the Kuiper Belt, named Lionheart, and they're ostensibly just mining it like they're doing all kinds of other asteroids and asteroids. But this one, they're doing their more experimental research, and it's run by artellects, so like very advanced AI. Their top physicist, this guy named Memphis, he was the only one who was in on the secret project with Eunice. Memphis, once he sort of figured out the aliens have sort of solved all this physics stuff, it sort of didn't break him, but he sort of lost his drive as a physicist, because he's like, why would I bother doing physics work now that we sort of have all this stuff figured out? So he sort of became the manager of Akinya's the Akinya family, the retainer he's referred to as, kind of like a butler, but also like managing their money in the household and doing everything. So with this research that Eunice has done, she's discovered means to create faster ships, which she does, but she's also discovered technology that could be used to create interstellar starships. And that sort of tech could potentially be used for evil, for creating weapons. And she fears that the nuclear 20th and 21st centuries, it was just a fluke that humanity managed to get through there without nuking each other to oblivion. So giving this new tech to humanity, she doesn't feel like humanity's ready for it yet. So she creates this elaborate sort of breadcrumb trail leading to it and sort of sits on it. She then gets in her ship, Winter Queen, and like I said, she does this trip voyage way out to the edge of space. And as far as history and civilization and its society is concerned, she turns around and comes back and builds this winter palace around her ship and lives there. But in reality, she just keeps going. She just fires her ship off into random interstellar space, puts herself in hibernation, and she's just gone. So for 60 years, they thought she was living up in this winter palace surrounding her ship, the Winter Queen, but she's been out in interstellar space. What she did do is build a new ship, another Winter Queen that looks like her ship, but it's got the state-of-the-art engine with the new tech, and that's she built the winter palace around that, and it's sort of been run by Artelect and also Memphis, who's in on this, and he's been sort of supplying it and then upgrading the ship over the past 60 years. So that's where our book starts. And it starts with Arethusa, the Panspermium Initiative, Linway, whatever you want to call her, and Ocular, and discovering an alien thing on another planet. Like a continent-size, geometrical shape thing, they call it the Mandala, on this other planet. And that sort of triggers things that the Artelect of Eunice, this sort of not really Eunice, this AI of Eunice, sort of realizes just is told by Linway that, hey, we found proof of alien life out there, which she already had when she found this alien artifact that helped her with the new physics. But she realizes, this is the time humanity could potentially use this tech now to travel there. They'll have a goal. Humanity will be united in sort of learning about this alien, whatever it is out there. So that's when Eunice dies, or her death is announced. And throughout the book, we think that, yes, she actually died. But, of course, we find at the very end that she's way out in interstellar space. So Eunice dies, setting this course of events in place that members of her family will follow the breadcrumbs that she's left and discover in Lionheart this information, this technology. And then it's up to them, up to the future, the later generations of Akinyas, what to do with that. And that's what this book is. It's following this trail that Eunice left to find this technology, or discover that this technology exists and decide what to do with it. So in terms of Akinyas, we have 4 main characters. We have Sunday and Jeffrey, who are sort of the protagonists. They're brother and sister. We have Hector and Lucas, who are also other brothers. They're cousins of Jeffrey and Sunday, and they're sort of the antagonists of the story. They're the ones who want to run the family business, and they want to cover up anything that Eunice has done and anything that could be embarrassing or hurt their stock prices. So they're kind of the antagonists of this book, trying to fight against Eunice or Sunday and Jeffrey, who are following this trail that their grandmother left. They're backed. Sunday and Jeffrey are backed by the Panspermian Initiative at first, but a faction of the Panspermians betrays them at one point, and so by the end of the book, they're sort of not on speaking terms with the Panspermians, and the Panspermians are sort of having this, not civil war, but this divide between them. And anyways, Jeffrey is a biologist. He studies elephants in Tanzania. His sister is an artist who lives on the moon in the descrutinized zone. And they get sent up, or Jeffrey gets sent up to the moon by Hector and Lucas to the safety deposit box. Inside the safety deposit box, they find a clue that leads them to a crater on the moon, which gives them another clue, which leads them to Phobos, which leads them then to Mars, and they go to Mars, or Sunday goes to Mars. And on Mars, there's this cool thing called the Evularium, which is like this sort of a park of robots where all of these robots are constantly competing against each other and growing and learning from each other and sort of evolving based on this intense competition very quickly. And some humans, instead of wiping them out, just sort of wait until some new technology is developed by these evolving machines and then harvests it for retail sale. So that's kind of a cool idea. But there's this one organism called the aggregate that has evolved cooperation. So it's literally an aggregate of multiple machines that have agreed to cooperate with each other for survival. So it's kind of like how humanity was a bunch of monkeys on their own, but then formed communities. So the aggregate's like a massive moving city. And when Sunday gets there, she meets this girl Soya, this woman Soya, who really reminds her of her. It kind of looks like her. And it turns out that Soya is like her half aunt, because living inside the aggregate is Soya's father, Jonathan, who is Eunice's ex-husband, and Sunday's grandfather, who was presumed dead for like the past 100 years. But he's just been living in there because he faked his death. Because why not? Oh, and it also turns out that Eunice is the one that probably started the Evolarium when she was there way back when. She like programmed these robots to go out and collect supplies for her and sort of grow and learn from each other and had made them competitive and whatnot. So yes, Eunice kind of started the whole thing because apparently she's done everything. So it's on Mars that in the Evolarium where they get the final clue, which says they need to go to the Winter Palace, this habitat that Eunice has been living in for so long, and they just have to go there. So Hector and Lucas are sort of rushing there, but Jeffrey's also rushing there, and Hector gets there, and then Jeffrey gets there with his girlfriend Jumai, and they go inside, and it turns out Eunice is not there. She's been gone. She hasn't lived there, and instead there's this top-of-the-line ship that takes them to trans-Neptunian orbit, which is super, super far out, but it does it way faster than any ship that they've ever known about because it has this new physics technology. And then they reach Lionheart, this asteroid where these experiments have been carried out, and they're introduced to an artellect of the young Eunice, who well, I guess she's not young, she looks young, but an artellect of Eunice, who is for all intents and purposes Eunice, but who explains the whole thing to them and deletes herself, but gives them the power of the technology and says it's up to you whether to use it or not, whether this is the time to use it. It's up to them. Also, speaking of artellects, Sunday has been working on this construct, this sort of AI construct that's not quite AI. It sounds very much like LLMs nowadays, like ChatGPT sort of things. It's a collection of all the information that's publicly available about Eunice. And it sort of creates like an AI, like a ChatGPT model that runs based on the nanites in their head and sort of can create a projection. It's in Jeffrey and Sunday's head of their grandmother Eunice. And so she's sort of along to help them out. And as Eunice is getting more information about herself, she's growing and becoming more like herself. But then they meet this artellect of Eunice, which is essentially sort of the perfected version of this. And so that sort of negates all the effort they did to create this version of Eunice. So that's how it ends. Hector dies by accident. I mean, at the end of it, Jeffrey and Hector and Lucas and Sunday, they all sort of get along and agree to work together for the family. But Hector dies in an accident getting into Lionheart. Memphis also dies in an elephant accident. The elephants kill him, and Jeffrey thinks it's because that the elephants see Memphis as an elephant killer, because when Jeffrey was a baby, or not a baby, when he was a kid, the Memphis had to kill one of the elephants to keep Sunday and Jeffrey safe. And sort of that feeling of Memphis as one who had killed an elephant was passed to Matilda, the elephant matriarch, because the elephants also have nanomachines in their head, and Jeffrey's been like combining their minds. And sort of making a neural link between the two of them. It's just kind of weird to hear the term neural link given. Anyways, yeah, so elephants do feature prominently in this, and I know they do in the next couple books as well. I feel like this book was very much a setup. A lot of books, the first book of a trilogy is very much standalone, and then the other two sort of build upon it, but this one feels like the whole series was planned from the get-go. And this was just sort of the prologue. A lot of world building, not a lot of world building, but sort of world building and getting to know these characters and getting to know the background. And this is just sort of one stage in history. And then when we get to the next book, which is 200 years later, all the events from this book will be history. And it was a mystery and stuff, but if I explain it like the way I did in this and just sort of give up the mystery, it's cool, but I don't know, it felt like a long book to me. It was 550 pages or something, which is like, I guess, a normal size book, but it felt long. But I'm going to keep reading. The next one's the one that sticks in my head a lot. I literally cannot think of what the third one is about. But some really cool ideas. I do love Alastair Reynolds as a sci-fi writer. Still my favorite writer, even though I do love the Quantum Thief trilogy as my favorite sci-fi trilogy. Anyways, that was Blue Remembered Earth by Alastair Reynolds.